Okay, let's look at 5.5. Okay, this is continuation from the video for 5.4. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply some of the concepts of section 4.7. In section 4.7 we had ordinary sentences, and we had to translate them into arguments that would fit in syllogistic form. So we had to take it and turn it into either an A, E, I, or O statement. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the premise and conclusion. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to translate one statement so that we have two terms. Then we're going to translate the second statement and remembering what our two terms were, and then finally we'll translate the last statement using the two terms that are not common in the first two statements, right? So we're going to try to keep everything consistent, so it's a process. And then we're going to put it into a standard syllogism, into a standard form. So remember 4.7. Here's an example. All the movies except for chick flicks were exciting, hence the action films were exciting because none of them are chick flicks. Okay, so look at verbiage and we'll talk about this. So we know that the conclusion is going to be, based on the word hence, action films were exciting. We know that our first premise, therefore, is going to be of all the movies except for chick flicks were exciting, and the second premise is going to be none of them are chick flicks. So let's look at these step by step. All the movies except for chick flicks were exciting, none of them were chick flicks, therefore the action films were exciting. So we'll start with the conclusion. The action films were exciting, so we're going to say that all action films are films that were exciting. Right? We've got to make sure we give it a noun. We can't just use adverbs. Films that were exciting is adjective or an adverb. Adjective. We can't use an adjective. We've got to make sure we put a subject in there. So all action films are films that were exciting. Okay. So we have two terms now: action films, films that were exciting. Okay. So we have those two terms. We have that here in bullet point 1. Bullet point 2. The other premises talk about exciting films, so we'll be using the word action films, right? Also, from the original statement, we know that the them refers to action films. So no action films are chick flicks. So let's go back and am I going the right direction? Yeah. None of them are chick flicks. So we know that them refers to action films, so therefore no action films are chick flicks. Right? So we're just using terms that we've already used and we're adding a new one, right? So now we have chick flicks. So the terms we have are films that were exciting and chick flicks. We just have to figure out which form to put these terms into that make the statement, okay? No chick flicks, okay? So up here, all the movies except for chick flicks were exciting. No chick flicks are films that were exciting. So now we have our syllogism. So our first premise is no chick flicks are films that were exciting. Second premise, no action films are chick flicks, therefore all action films are films that were exciting. So we look at it and say, is it in the standard form? And the answer is yes. Okay, so it's in standard form. How do we know? Okay, all action films are films that were exciting. So films that were exciting is our films right here. Films that were exciting is the predicate of our conclusion, making it the major term, so it must be in the major premise, and films that were exciting is in the major premise. Therefore, we know it's in standard form. Okay, so now we know it's an EEA statement. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to look at it and say, is it valid or not? We could go back to page 262 and look at our chart. But let's look at the rules. So since we talked about the rules last section, let's look at the rules now. Okay, so if we go to the rules, and I know it already tells you there, but we'll go by them step by step. If both premises are universal, the conclusion cannot be particular. So we have universal, cannot be particular. So therefore, we don't have a particular conclusion, so we know that Rule 5 doesn't apply. So let's go look at Rule 4. A negative premise requires a negative conclusion. Negative conclusion requires a negative premise. So let's go and see what we have. We have a negative conclusion, negative premise, positive conclusion. So let's go back and look at our rule. Negative, negative, and positive. A negative requires a negative conclusion. A negative conclusion requires a negative premise. Okay? Well, what we have is we have two negatives and a positive. This deals with one negative and a positive, so therefore we're going to move on. Let's look at rule number 3. Rule number 3 says, and I guess I just went past it, didn't I? Two negative premises are not allowed. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go back to what we had here. We have a no negative premise, a no negative premise, and a positive conclusion. Therefore, we know it violates rule number 3. Two negative premises are not allowed, therefore it's called an exclusive premises. And so therefore we've applied now this rule to the next example that we're looking at in our PowerPoint. Okay, so hopefully this kind of helps you get the idea. If you have questions, again, write them down, bring them to class, go through your homework, notify the ones that are giving you trouble. This is not the easiest section. Section 5.4 and 5.5 are not the easiest. But they're not that difficult if we learn to just look at things and take them step by step. So we'll talk about it more in class. See you then.